besides for one or two instances in my life, this is probably the biggest space I've ever worked in. I really sort of thrive in small spaces. I don't like big spaces. I like a small space where I can have everything at hand, where I can sort of keep everything close by. I mean, here there's a lot of graphic novels and that sort of thing. Then, I mean, a lot of my books I also use a lot for teaching. I think the most, I mean, this Documents of Contemporary Art series, Whitechapel and MIT, I think I have all of those now. And I use those a lot in the seminar class that I teach. My series of Nirvana books that I've had since high school. Some of them are newer, but most of those have been following me around for years. My David Hockney books, I've definitely had since undergrad. I was obsessed with Hockney for a while in my undergrad, without a doubt. And I pulled this out so I wouldn't forget it, but this is a book. I forget who tracked this down and gave it to me. Someone knew that it was right up my alley. The Massacre of Beaumont Hamel, written and illustrated by Joan Horwood. It's about Beaumont Hamel, which is, the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, the Massacre of Beaumont Hamel on July 1st, 1916. And it's the story of Beaumont Hamel, but it also has these really simple but incredible illustrations. There's the wall of books, and then there's this shelf of animals. Most of them are that brand, I can't remember what they're called. Yeah, the German little toys, replicas, fairly lifelike of all these animals. So mostly I've been getting just really small animals, although I got a moose the other day. But my plan was to put that guy on the dash of my car for my drive to Newfoundland, but it didn't really happen. I forgot him. I'll have to take him next time. Other than that, I sort of always change the animals slightly, create little stories, and that's just something I do in my studio when I'm bored. In the back are my ceramic finger puppets, ghost costumes for fingers. I made these at the Banff Center a few years ago just for fun. It was around Halloween, and I thought I could make some ghost costumes for my fingers out of clay, and then we raku fired them. I think a lot of the things, because I work with a lot of wood, and I definitely play a lot with scale. Like, I make ladders that are really small scale that are rather useless. So I kind of like things that are really, I like tiny things that, if sort of taken out of their context, could be much larger. And that's kind of the little rocks I collect. So I pick up all these little stones that I think look rather mammoth in some way, if I was just that a millimeter tall standing next to them. I guess all rocks are like that, but still, there's something about each of these stones specifically that I liked. And I have boxes of these things. I think I've been doing that since I was a little kid, collecting rocks and sticks. My mom says that when I'd come home as a child, that was the thing. Like, she'd empty my pockets and it was always rocks and sticks. And she'd be like, "Why rocks and sticks?" And I'd be like, "Oh, I love the shape of that stick. That stick is really great." And here I am at 33 years old, carving sticks. Not too much unlike what I did, I guess, when I was 4 or 5 years old. I've been doing a lot of drawings in the last couple of years that are text-based drawings. Working a lot with language and sort of sayings that sort of get stuck in my head. And if I get one that I think might be turned into a drawing, I'll kind of sort of do a mock-up of it. And that's sort of just a mock-up here of one. Strewn about the yard were various grains, seeds, fish meal, oyster shells, and bits of foul-smelling meat, habitual offerings to a chicken named Gold Coins. And if you look, it's all like little bits of what I imagine, just those things like fish meal and bits of shells and grains and everything all, again, gathered together. There's a lot of old sketchbooks thrown in about there too as well. Every now and then. Sketchbooks, old sketchbooks. They've been kicking around for years, some of them. And that's the one thing I think that's kind of been a constant, is I still keep sketchbooks. Although these days they're really tiny, and I've gotten into these little teeny tiny moleskins series. A lot of these books, I just sit and I kind of again, the kind of things when I'm sitting and thinking and writing and I'm kind of working on something, but I also keep them around when I'm drawing and doing more meticulous drawing things. And they're actually just books that I use to clean my brushes in. So I just clean my brushes, or when I use a lot of paint markers. So if I get like a blob or blot within a paint marker and I know it's not going to work in the drawing, I'll just smear it into the book. And then I kind of use them like little presses of sorts. So that I print them and I press them into each other. And I make these little, most of them turn out being landscapes, which is really funny because I don't really make landscapes in any other way in my work at all. But then what's happened in recent years is that, or in the last year or so, I started actually going through them and being more serious about them. And I've started taking some of the images from the books and making them large scale, but like really large scale. So this drawing, for example, which is here, you know, it's the size of my hand. It exists up there in one of those those rolls of drawings, and it's about like 12 feet high by 4 feet wide. So I've been taking really tiny things and again making them really big, kind of like the rocks and everything in the sticks. Maybe I think for some people their studio is just their studio, but my studio is not my studio and just the studio. It's the studio, it's the office. It's really, I think, the space where, as much as some things do get made here, but because of the size of it, a lot of things sort of just, this is just sort of the springboard. This is just sort of the genesis of many ideas sort of happen here. So when I think of something that can't be made in this space, I'll often stay in this space for as long as I can. I'll sit, I'll work it out on the computer. I'll use like a story, for example. I can work that out on the computer very much so, but then I can't really, if I'm thinking of how I would tell that story, I never know for sure how it's going to work until I actually do it in a public venue. Whereas some of the things that I make, whether they're slightly sculptural or, sometimes I work in printmaking, or sometimes I do want to make a larger painting, I have to leave this space. It doesn't happen here. I go to another space sometimes. Already, since I've been living in Sackville, it's really great here at the university because I can go use the print shop if I need to. I can go over to sculpture and fabricate something there. The dream, I guess, is to have a big shed at some point. But even when I envision myself in like my dream studio, my dream shed, I still think of it broken into much smaller spaces. I really think I'd still want a small space that would function as the place where just the thinking and just the sort of small-scale image making happens, for sure. I kind of need everything at arm's length, I think. That's kind of why I'm here. I'd love, for many years I've done this sort of angle approach to the thing, 2 tables. This is exactly kind of it is pretty much exactly how I worked in grad school as well. I'd have 1 table to my left and then 1 right in front of me, and that way I can sort of, if I'm working on a drawing here and that needs to dry, I can just pop that over here, and then I need to work on this one for a bit, and then I pull out something and I work and draw. So I kind of like that. I kind of like in the past I've referred to it as my deck. I always have a deck of drawings when I'm working on like a project. The other thing I guess that sort of relates to that is just having everything that I might possibly need. So those things are inks. I use a lot of ink. At any given point there's like 4 or 5 bottles of ink there, but already like under here I think there's like a whole case of ink in here. There's a whole case of spray paint there. Pens might be a bit of an obsession. Okay, we got 1, 2, 3, 4 pencil cases, Sharpie paint markers, Micron pigment liners, Prismacolors. At any given point, I'd say, and it sounds crazy, but I'd say I have like 200 or 300 pens that are in use. I'm more of like the type of person who would go into the studio and then work like non-stop for like 15 hours, something like that, and then not go again for like another couple days. I kind of go, I know that I work much better at night. When I'm working on a large sort of intense project that might have like 50 or 60 drawings, I'd say go in only in the evenings and work all through the night. That's usually how I prefer. I don't think I've done a lot of that recently, but in the past that's almost exclusively how I've worked. I've also over the years almost always had my studio in my home. I make things all over the place. I carry my little tiny sketchbooks that I showed earlier. They're often in my pocket, in my car. I always at least, even the way, I have my organized pencil cases, but like the side, what would you call those? The side compartments, the door compartments in my car. There are pens and paint markers in each of them. I kind of always have them, like I said, arm's length. There's never a marker or pen or a bottle of black ink is never more than an arm length away. If there's just, I think, something important, there's something really sort of integral, really, what's the word I'm looking for? Something really essential that comes from just making every day. In some way, every day making something, making whether it's just like the smallest mark in one of those little mess books, or if it's one of my sort of more elaborate drawings that I might have to work on for like 3 or 4 hours at a time, I try to make something every day. Because of that, I've become rather indiscriminate about like what counts, Yeah, so but then I have work that's sort of about that. I think that's about sort of just about habit, about habitual making. I mean, these text drawings, for example, are kind of really ridiculous when you look at them. I mean, the message, or the sort of the inherent message, the inherent content of the text, you would get whether if I just silk screened it right away. So they're kind of ridiculous. This thing probably took me hours upon hours. I can't even count the number of hours because I started working on this last summer, and then made me so angry because I was like, I'm not getting anywhere with it, that I just put it away for the year, and I finished it this summer. In almost all of the things that I make, I think it's really important for people to sort of acknowledge that sort of handmade quality, or just recognize how much work has gone into it, whether it's frivolous or pointless or not. But just being able to acknowledge, being able to, I guess, recognize, just see that, wow, that took a lot of time. And that's not necessarily, I think, about me, or I don't think so. I think that's more so just about the work itself. It's not like I need a merit badge for excessive drawing. It's more about just like, drawing can be really excessive. I kind of keep just going. I don't think I ever struggle to make, but I do sometimes struggle with like I talked earlier about sort of not really discriminating against like what's work and what's not work, and what's art and not what's not art. But sometimes I do think, like, when do I draw the line at something that I just make for myself and something that's like meant to be shown, or that's meant for a public. I'm a constant collector. I'm constantly drawing, doodling, making little things. I'm reading. I'm continuously obsessed with rural Newfoundland, and I read more and more books about that. That's become a thing. I am constantly writing news stories that are meant to be told, some that'll never be told. I'm constantly collecting. I think that idea of collecting, I'm just always sort of like pulling together objects, ideas, images, stories, and I sort of have this giant archive, and then every now and then, like I said, something sort of floats to the top and makes it sort of clicks, and I go, yeah, that's what I'm going to concentrate on for the next 6 months. Yeah.